So, hey Alexa for Urban News, and I'm currently in Ottawa at the Westin Hotel where Canada Strong and Free is holding their Networking Conference 2023. During 3 days, many speakers are coming here to discuss about some problematic and issue that we live on in the society. The theme of this year is working for the middle class. And I had the chance during I was here to run into Andrew Lawton, that is not only the speaker, but one of the star journalists of True North. And I wanted to discuss with him about some of the issue we live on, but also what it is to be a conservative this day. I have an exclusive video, you don't want to miss that, so let's check it.
And it's oftentimes called cancel culture. And I think the two are very similar, but very distinct phenomena. Cancel culture is the overarching culture. Political discrimination is the tactical manifestation of cancel culture. And it's interesting because I shouldn't say no one, few people will openly defend cancel culture. People will say, well, I'm against it, but they support institutions that are increasingly closed off to people of viewpoints.
Today I'm asking the people, the theme of the conference is working for the middle class. What is your biggest concern actually for the middle class?
Well, one of the challenges is that it means different things to different people. There was a poll a few years ago that asked Canadians how they identify, and virtually everyone said middle class. No matter how poor or rich they were, everyone thinks they're in the middle class. And Justin Trudeau had this minister that was responsible for the middle class who couldn't answer what middle class was. So I feel a lot of the times politicians will talk about making things better for the middle class, but they don't talk about what that actually means, and they don't talk about who's in that group and what the issues are. And I think right now the cost of living crisis, inflation is putting everyone into the lower class. I mean, people just don't have money right now. Even people that have had very good jobs with very good salary right now cannot afford to live. And I think that's a huge problem that you can't just be abstract about. You have to be very specific.
What would be the biggest problem right now with Canada?
Well, that's a big question. And look, I think over the last few years, we saw a monumental shift of power to government, of government control over personal medical choices, over free speech, over the right to assembly. And we saw that constitutional rights didn't actually matter, that, you could say on paper you have freedom of speech, but it's not a real right. And on paper you have freedom of mobility, but in practice you don't. And I think the problem is that Canadians let that happen. And sometimes we could say, well, the government did it, but people re-elected Justin Trudeau. People have elected François Legault. People re-elected Doug Ford in Ontario. People have supported governments that took away their freedom. And I think that in this country, we need to reclaim freedom.
And this is one of my questions, is through the history of Canada, there is always been a battle between liberal and conservative. And liberal have an easier way to be elected. Why?
Well, I think one of the problems is that we have three main parties in English Canada, the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. And because there are three, and you have the Conservatives on the right, the NDP on the left, the Liberals have kind of convinced people that they're in the middle. They're not in the middle. They're a left-wing party. In fact, in some cases, they're just as socialist as the NDP. But because they're in between two, people think they're the moderate option. And I think you get a lot of Canadians that just sort of, they call it parking their vote there. They don't really think about it. That's just the default. So one example, years ago, CBC did this quiz where you go and you answer questions and it tells you what party you should vote for. And if you went through and you didn't answer any question, so you just said, don't know, it said Liberal. So that was the whole thing. So it's sort of this fake party of neutrality, of being in the middle. And I think a lot of Canadians have sort of internalized that.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, can you explain what is being a conservative for you?
Well, I identify as more of a libertarian because I think that personal liberty is more important than conservatism, the way that conservatism is sometimes defined. But to me, it means freedom. And the party of freedom right now needs to be a party that's going to approach it from the right, because the Liberals, and, at the core of their name is liberty, liberal, they're not an actual liberal party. They're not a party of liberty. And I think it's the right that needs to stand up for freedom. And that's freedom of speech. That's freedom against vaccine mandates. That's freedom against lockdowns. It's democratic freedom. It's all of these things. That's, to me, what it means. And it's not about a party. It's about ideas and ideals.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that the Liberal Justin Trudeau regime did so far?
Well, how long do we have? That's a very long. That'll take the whole conference to do. Listen, I think that when Justin Trudeau was elected Liberal leader, one of the first things he did was ban members of his caucus from being pro-life. They could not be against abortion and be Liberal members of Parliament, and that set a tone that he has really kept as he's now become Prime Minister and has been Prime Minister for almost 8 years, which is that you can only believe what he believes and you can only think what he thinks. And I don't think that him banning pro-life members of the Liberal caucus was the biggest mistake, but I think it's revealing of the attitude that we have lived with as Canadians, which is that he is the only one that gets to decide how things are. And anyone who criticizes him is gone.
Mm-hmm. And what you will categorize the politic that we live on right now?
Well, I think that it's challenging because in Canada, we had the Freedom Convoy, in which a lot of people for the first time started to push back against the government and talk about liberty, talk about freedom. And we're beyond COVID now. We're beyond lockdowns. We're, for the most part, beyond vaccine mandates, not all. And I think we need to talk about what do we do with this now? How do we keep that flame of liberty alive? And that needs to be a big challenge that really rests on individual Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
Han Dong is an outstanding member of our team, and suggestions that he is somehow not loyal to Canada should not be entertained.
Because you're a member of media and you're following what is going on. And so I just want to a little bit know your point of view about the interference of China in Canada.
Look, I think that Justin Trudeau, when he made that comment in 2013 about how China was the country he most admired and their basic dictatorship, that was revealing because he was being honest that he doesn't see China as a threat. He sees it as a country to, admittedly, in his own words, admire.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start, investing in solar. I mean, there is a flexibility that I know Stephen Harper must dream about of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted.
So when we find out that China's been interfering in Canada's elections and that the government knew about it, did they not talk about it and deal with it because they didn't care, they didn't believe it, or because they were okay with it? And I think, there are probably different aspects of that we could ask the Liberal government. But whenever they go through such efforts to not talk about something, to hide something, to not let witnesses testify, what's the reason? What are they hiding? And I think that we are going to find that they knew a lot more than they admitted and didn't do anything about it. Mm-hmm.
Do you think the new rapporteur will do the job that we expect him to do?
Justin Trudeau's skiing buddy, David Johnston? No, I don't think he will. And, this is a guy who is on the board of the Trudeau Foundation, which is implicated in the China election interference story. So I think that, there needs to be a public inquiry, but I also think that people need to understand that this is a bigger issue than something that can just be solved overnight. I mean, it's going to take at least a year for there to be an inquiry, if there is going to be an inquiry, in which time there could be an election. And we could similarly see China really investing itself in an outcome. So I think the question Canadians need to ask is, why did China want Justin Trudeau to win?
Do you know?
I have ideas. I think it's because they knew that he was never going to go up against them. They knew that he was the kind of guy that when push comes to shove would not be strong on China. And we've seen that. He's not condemned China's treatment of the Uyghurs. He's not really asserted Canada in Canada's interest against China on trade or on other issues. So I think he is, as the old Soviet line goes, the useful idiot to China. He doesn't even know he's being an asset to them, but what he's doing is inadvertently or perhaps more knowingly helping China's interests.
so gross and disgusting that this Prime Minister keeps using the pandemic as an excuse for his corruption. The very first act that this Prime Minister did when the pandemic hit was try to give himself unprecedented power and eliminate the role of the opposition in Parliament. And now we know why, Mr. Speaker, because when they're pushing $300 billion worth of deficit out the door, they will stop and take the time to reward their friends. That is the essence of this Liberal Party under this Liberal Prime Minister. I don't even have a question, Mr. Speaker. It's just disgusting.
But Andrew Scheer recently called Justin Trudeau a corrupt person because he followed to the law 3 times. What do you have to say about this?
I think Justin Trudeau has shown that there are no consequences for his actions. I mean, you know, like we were talking about in another part of this, that when MPs have stepped out of line and criticized Justin Trudeau, they get kicked out of caucus. But when Justin Trudeau breaks ethics laws, there's no penalty, there's no punishment, everything's fine. So I think that if any Conservative were to have done as many times as Trudeau has, what Trudeau has done on ethics rules, they would be out. They would be done. They would be just completely humiliated and disgraced. But Justin Trudeau plays by different rules.
Why we let that happen?
Well, I mean, that's a question you need to ask Canadians, and it's a difficult one. I think that the media is a part of it. The media takes a very different approach to Justin Trudeau than they do to Conservatives. And it's not to say they're all Liberals, but I think that a lot of journalists are not as interested in keeping the story alive. So they move on, maybe they ask a couple of tough questions about whatever the scandal is for a week, and then they go on to the next story about, oh, this Conservative said something about abortion, or oh, this Conservative is against the carbon tax, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
So if you like our content, if you like our journalism, the way to help us, it's to go to rebelfieldreport.com, and you can chip in some money to help your best journalism. That's mean us. Cheers.